All right, good morning, everyone, from a remote location representing the NESA Center. This is Jeff Payne. This is the 16th, I believe, iteration of NESA's Indian Ocean Regional Digital Forum that has been taking place. We are honored today to be joined by Ambassador Alex Rondos, who is the special representative to the Horn of Africa for the European Union. He is joining us today from Kenya, which is, like the rest of the world, suffering from the effects of the pandemic. And of course, I'm Jeff Payne. I lead a lot of the digital outreach related to the Indian Ocean region for the NESA Center. Ambassador, we're honored to have you join us this morning. And to kick off this conversation today, a question to you. It's not a direct question, but it gives you some room to maneuver, and that is this. How should we understand the mixture of both regional and non-regional interests being pursued throughout the Horn of Africa? So to you, sir.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this and to have a real exchange of just conversation about this. Your question is, it's both huge, so I'm going to try to give you a quick shorthand answer on it. This region, which comprises, I would say, when I think about it, it's from the south of Egypt all the way down to Tanzania. And that is the eastern coast of Africa that concerns me, and then the hinterlands behind it, which includes countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, Sudan, and we can go into more detail on that. Now, a couple of points I'd make that for us to understand, I think, some of the dynamics. This is a region which is going through a quite extraordinary change and a political change at the moment. We loosely refer to it as transitions, and it's what's happened in Ethiopia and Sudan that have captured our attention, as they should. These are not easy transitions. It involves 150 million people and countries whose stability or instability will shape the stability of the wider region around it. So Sudan, you've got to imagine Egypt, Libya, Chad, Central Africa. Ethiopia brings you much closer to the eastern shore of Africa. That's how big the implications are. Now, those transitions, which mean it's an end of a status quo in the region we refer to as the Horn of Africa. New regimes are creating new relationships among themselves. So, I'll give you an example. Ethiopia, under Prime Minister Abiy, flipped its policy towards Somalia and is now focused on supporting a stronger role for the central government of Somalia as opposed to the more federalized approach of the past. This has implications. If we bear that in mind, and also the fact that Eritrea, as there's been a rapprochement, we're not quite sure how deep it is, but between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, we're talking about a long stretch of this line of Eastern Africa. And this has created tensions with the rest of the countries of the Horn, who are asking themselves, is there an attempt here to recreate the original small Horn, which would have been Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Djibouti? So there are tensions that have emerged. And as a consequence, we've got an Ethiopia that has had a problem, real teething problems in its relationships with Sudan. And likewise, Kenya and Ethiopia are not on the same sheet of music anymore as it once was. There's some of the basic assumptions, especially in dealing with Somalia, because Somalia, at the end of the day, its security affects its neighbors and its neighbors affect its own security. And we're not there yet towards a common approach of a sort of sub-regional security. These are some of the, how can I put it, there's a disequilibrium that has emerged in the region. It's understandable. It shouldn't lead us to any panic, but it needs to be managed. Why? Because we've got two major countries with new regimes who are just getting used to being in power. So after 30 years of a very rigid systems in Sudan and Ethiopia, it's a complete change, different constituencies being answered to and the like. So I'd ask you to bear that in mind as you look at that. The flip side of this is that there is equally a total disequilibrium among some of the countries outside the region who have now begun to show a real interest and engagement in the region. Now, what am I talking about? First of all, it's the Gulf. The split that occurred in the Gulf, initially with Qatar, already created all sorts of difficulties because Qatar was deeply embedded in some countries like Sudan and certainly still is in Ethiopia. Qatar has associated itself and is seen to be associated, and in practice there is a good deal of common activity with Turkey. In the last months, we have seen that countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, who are at the forefront of one bloc, as it were, who have now begun to see in Turkey an even deeper threat. And this is globally, but in the Horn of Africa, this plays a role. And what we're waiting to see now is whether these countries may try to take steps to either curb, diminish, or whatever, the role of Turkey wherever they see it. These are some of the dynamics. Now, in addition to that, countries that I'm mentioning in the Gulf also have a very deep interest in the region. The issue of the Nile, Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, which is a poisonous diplomatic dispute, which I happen to be involved in at the moment in being part of observing the process officially along with the United States, is a dispute which frankly should be turned into a mega economic opportunity. This is the Nile Valley, and we're trying to get a very difficult decisions made, politically difficult decisions made on the cheap, if I may put it that way. These are countries where if we change the irrigation, we did the electrical grids and the like, one country would become a hydropower, which is Ethiopia. Sudan would become a breadbasket for the Gulf, not just for itself and the region. So there are all sorts of contending stakes. And my concern at the moment, I think the challenge we all face when we look at these two regions, and now I'm not even going to enter yet, and we can wait for the conversation to see how we review the role of China. Where does the United States come out? Because don't forget, these countries are also looking at, China and the United States are the elephants in the room. The EU is a benign sort of player, but we're not a military force. Okay, so these countries are watching in the region and across the Gulf and the Horn. So we must bear that in mind. My own view on this is, and my concern is why I'm keen to discuss with you all is, I feel we have the beginnings of a rather potentially dangerous strategic traffic jam, which is going to start occurring in an area like the Horn of Africa, which is very vulnerable. It is susceptible to fragmentation and lethal fragmentation. Now, how do we prevent that occurring and get the best of the like minds to say, here's an opportunity to cooperate? So we build prosperity, minimize disorder, and remember the Gulf will be hit by migrants or terrorism long before even we in Europe will. If things go wrong, we protect the sea lanes, and we begin to create a regime, as it were, that governs what I would call the maritime politics and policies. Because if you think carefully, here's my concluding note to you all, and it's areas where I'm climbing into matters which probably that many of you were far better equipped than I to comment on. But what I see from my perch is 4 maritime areas which are ungoverned, as it were. There's the Eastern Mediterranean, which is now the subject of a resource war, as resource dispute. There is the Nile River, where there's no agreement on a massive transboundary water flow, on which many lives hang. There is the Red Sea, where there is no regime, as it were, but which has become critical because Saudi Arabia is now concerned, as well as Egypt, about the security. And then there is the Gulf of Aden projecting out into the Western Indian Ocean. And the Western Indian Ocean, which is something that you all work with, which is a subject which absolutely fascinates me, and I'd love to see much more done, is it has become a major illicit trafficking route. The east coast of Africa is being penetrated. It is, and how can I put it? A few dollars go a long way if you want to capture a bit of a state. And so when we hear about the quantum leap in heroin trafficking and whatever else coming in, I see a health problem, but I also see a political problem. Because for it to be trafficked through there means that there are people who are complicit. And those people who are complicit tend to be part of a security structure of a country, in terms of a political structure. And that's where I worry about a potential disorder. But I'd rather listen to you all, because one of the biggest threats we face, beyond what I've said, is the incorporation of the Horn of Africa into the global, the global organized criminal routes and networks. And we don't know enough about it. And we also don't know to what extent the networks, the illicit financial flows, and terrorists piggyback on each other. And therein lies the deep, deep problem that we must face. I hope I've sort of started to answer and open up a conversation for us. Over to you, Jeff.
Sir, no, absolutely. And what you ended with, honestly, is the problem set that NESA, it's one of the problem sets that NESA is trying to not only work with partners on, but trying to navigate ourselves. But before we get into the strategic thing, where I think that us at NESA can be more active conversants with you, let me follow up with part of the attention that the Horn region, or the Greater Horn, or the Nile Delta region that you discussed. I mean, however you want to define it geographically, has garnered a lot of attention, is because of this long promised and seemingly on the horizon economic explosion that is going to occur. I mean, yes, there is some geopolitics going on in the Red Sea, which is why there have been port developments and coastal development projects up and down the west coast
Yep.
of the Red Sea. But also there was a lot of potential economic value in that. And Ethiopia's rise, Sudan's regime change promising a new economic future. How much of that is based upon reality, and how much of it was hype? And then also adding in the current pandemic, is this promised future economic powerhouse region delayed or erased or something else? What's your response there?
The potential to be a powerhouse is there. So what are the preconditions? The preconditions are, first, run countries properly. Sudan was an Islamist kleptocracy. Biggest GDP in the Horn, but still a kleptocracy. And to this moment, we still don't know where most of that money is. Let's start with that. Ethiopia, complete flip. They are, the ultimate Marxist economy, command economy, which has to be liberalized to maximize wealth. Can it be liberalized in a way that will create more equities in the country rather than inequities? Somalia, I'll leave aside. Somalia is a thriving economy without a state, but it has enormous potential. This is a region where you have hydropower. You've got all sorts of hydrocarbons. There's wealth in the region. Now, I think that it is very difficult to see the region being able to maximize this potential if, first of all, the changes that are occurring in Ethiopia and Sudan which are the two big markets and potential drivers, do not consolidate themselves. There's no way anyone's going to invest in these countries if there's no predictability in terms of politics, regulations, and the like. No investor. These are countries which need massive investment. So I don't think we're going to see anything soon until these transitions are consolidated. In order to consolidate, we have to play, when I say we, the West, the international community, to find a way of seeing how we can distill and get the best form of investment into those countries to help them bridge. They need to be undergirded as they make reforms. There are going to be deep, biting reforms. It's the end of subsidies. People are going to feel they're left behind. And we've learned over the last decades that if there isn't a system of giving a safety net, what you will end up is with populations, and let's bear this in mind, the populations of this region are 70% are under the age of 30 or 25. So what you have is a demographic tidal wave that is about to be breaking on the politics of this region. These are the aspirations. This is the market. These are people who are more educated than any before, but their numbers are outstripping the economic capacity to absorb them. How do we flip it? Second, or a third major point, we've got to look at the debt issue. This generation has been mortgaged by the leaders of the last 20 years, this new generation, with new debt and a heck of from China, under terms that are more opaque than almost any other debt creditor scheme that we know. So can the G20 get together, have a discussion where you match the Paris Club, China, the IFIs, to start coming up with arrangements at the very least to delay payments on debt servicing and look and see if we can restructure debt. Otherwise, these countries are asphyxiated financially. Conclusion is, with COVID, we have all the more reason to do this because, believe me, these countries have discovered what it is to have not developed sufficiently their economic infrastructure and manufacturing base and are going to emerge from COVID. And so we'll be ready for that. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. Yes, the potential's there. The preconditions have to be met. And we're part of that answer. It doesn't mean just doling up money. We've got to get much smarter. There's less cash for big challenges, but the payoff potentially is enormous. Can we get it right? That's my answer to you.
Well, there's a lot of value, a lot of data to wade through there, but I appreciate that. Let's move on to the strategic question you kind of put before us at NESA, and I welcome my colleagues from NESA to jump into this as well. Clearly, one of the things we witnessed, as you pointed out, is this kind of generator of illicit activity that uses the maritime routes and the lack of effective oversight or effective custodial control of littoral spaces to do everything from human trafficking to the illegal exportation of arms, antiquities trading, charcoal. There's a whole list of things that have been smuggled. You add in that a lot of these groups are in some way, shape, or form either loosely or directly tied with violent extremist organizations in the region. And you get this explosion of criminality that no one seemingly has an answer to. And it's a puzzle that I have been dealing with. And honestly, the kind of best case study that I have to reference is what's going on in Southeast Asia. A similar process has occurred there with states that have much longer and deeper experiences with custodial littoral responsibilities. And the answer for them, I don't think necessarily is the answer for the Eastern African shoreline, But it is an issue of getting beyond the silos that all of the various institutions that are working the problem exist within, and B, not having a preferred methodology.
Hmm.
What can work should work, and you kind of figure out the lessons later. Now that's kind of the lesson learned. It's not a permanent solution, but
Hmm.
getting back to what you've said about those issues, what what degree of a problem is this as a security challenge for the countries of the region, both in the Arabian Peninsula and across the Red Sea throughout the Horn of Africa? Is this a criminal problem that is a segment of its economy? Everyone knows it exists. They don't have the capability to address it yet. Or is it a substantial problem that threatens to undermine these sorts of political transitions, economic transformations that you talked about?
Um, Jeff, my own view is that it is probably the one unspoken and underestimated threat to the stability of this region. There is no reason why in East Africa, if rather, let me put it this way, if you look at what happened, the criminalization of politics in West Africa, which then meshed with, the different terrorist groups. There's no reason to say that organized crime and criminal networks do not have very similar intentions in this region. What worries me is that this region is littoral to major navigation routes and other strategic allies and partners, and therefore one has to pay much more attention. So secondly, it is, in my view, and I would include also the terrorist problem is related to this. My view is that it needs to be looked as much as a criminal as a terrorist issue. And I combine the two. It is time, for example, we started addressing Al-Shabaab as a criminal entity, a mafia organization, which probably generates more income than the government of Somalia and Mogadishu, and is therefore able to be a political actor. And I mean a political actor, not just out of the barrel of a gun and an IED. They can buy their way into politics. Now, if you're doing organized crime, and you want to be able to use, this region is mainly used for transit. Okay. Therefore, who do you buy off and acquire in order to allow your product to move to wherever the end market is? That's where it becomes extremely dangerous. And I'm not sure that we've got the full magnitude, the full sense of it. I think also it therefore means that there needs to be a much more directed capacity to investigate and follow up on the criminal side. It's about financial flows. The loss to these economies is monumental. It means that when we give all our development assistance, are we in effect subsidizing what is a criminal enterprise carrying on somewhere else? It's not a direct link, but there's room to get smart about it and start having these discussions with the authorities. So I don't know if I'm addressing the question correctly for you, but when I look at the countries in the region going through major changes, which we're encouraging, we should be very careful that we're not too naive in what we're encouraging. Let's remember shock therapy in Russia 30 years ago. Okay, people want to get on in life, but the huge thing I want to come back to is the point I made about demography. This is where we're dealing with something that is radically different. You're talking about the fate. If Ethiopia, I'll give you Ethiopia by way of example, 100 million people. If 70 million are under the age of 30, it means that 50 million are under the age of 20. That's the statistical calculation. What do you do with 50 million? Let's assume half of them are males who are more inclined to mischief, to be honest, to become petty crooks, criminals, join gangs, whatever else. Think through the politics and then ask yourself, who has an interest in riding these people and herding them? That's the way I look at it. So we have a policing problem because the last thing we want is people who have nefarious intent and who are global and just don't care riding on the back of these populations under these circumstances. So answer is yes, it's criminal and it needs to be really jacked up, this response to it.
Thank you, sir. Anne, I'll bring you in just a second. I see your hand up. Anne Moisan is a colleague of ours here at NESA. She focuses on a lot of North Africa programs, works with AFRICOM regularly. But before I integrate her, what is I want to get your response to something that me and several colleagues who work primarily in the maritime domain think about is that the land-based challenge of this criminality mixed with political reformation or political instability, along with all this economic potentiality. On the land, that is a very complicated set of questions related to institutions, related to what international organizations do with lending, to what international powers do in terms of the partnerships. But the maritime issue is, while no less critical a problem, is has a more direct solution, and that is there needs to be new methodologies of how to integrate coastal communities. There needs to be integration of better technological tools for monitoring, oversight, and adaptability. And that's an easier puzzle to solve, in our view. Now, I want to get your thoughts on that, if you think that we're incorrect on that. But also, Anne, please, to you, to integrate you into the conversation.
One of the questions that I appreciated your focus on transnational threats, and I think it's something that from a U.S. perspective, we often don't focus as much on and have a tendency to focus more on terrorism rather than on transnational threats with terrorism as an element of that. But a lot of it gets back to, I think, some of the things that you raised is this issue of good governance, which there doesn't seem to be a U.S. appetite to focus on that. And I don't know whether you see the U.S. as the best partner in Africa to actually deal with that, especially since our focus seems to be more on just countering any China influence in the region, where China comes in with no conditions, for its investment, and is very appealing to leaders in governments, that have a tendency to not particularly be focused on good governance and reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So, Ambassador, two easy sets of questions to address there. Both the thing that I mentioned, but also Anne's rightful point about the governance question and how the United States can be of help.
I think, look, both very, very valid questions. One, yours, Jeff. I think I would love to see a real focus on getting to maritime solutions. Why? Because I think actually we could move fairly quickly to those. What do I mean? First of all, coastal policing. Let me a step back. Integrating coastal communities into the economy and the like. Look carefully at the coast of East Africa and the radicalization of that coastline. The answer isn't that radical. It is that they found a nesting place and a welcome one. Why? Somalia. Piracy was symptomatic of something that was going wrong. By the way, there's a big question mark. I'd like to know how secure, if Eritrea goes towards any kind of change of regime or transition, how secure are 700 kilometers of the Eritrean coast? So let's go work down from there. Somaliland, okay, Somalia, uncertain. But all the way down, we see communities that have not been properly integrated economically, let alone politically, marginalized, and therefore easy picking. So let's start with that. Either to be criminalized or radicalized or both. Second, policing. You probably know this infinitely better than I, but if you look carefully at the technology that there is all along this huge long coastline, the technical capacity to police the immediate maritime frontiers and the broader economic zones, it is minimal. I mean, we're talking about sort of one police car in a city of 10 million people, as it were, is the way I see it. So are we serious or aren't we? Secondly, we now have, I'm out of my depth, but I know incredibly sophisticated technology, which allows one to be able to track what is happening offshore, to track the patterns, anticipate, and see if one can move to prevent either illicit traffic or whatever, but real hard policing. The third then is, what are the legal structures? We need to ask ourselves. I am just worried at the moment. I don't see along the entire coastline a regulated coastline, regulated coastal economies, regulated and policed coastlines. You know, I've got a problem now already. Back in Somalia, we had people doing all sorts of illegal fishing because the fishing companies, many of them from the Far East, but also one or two rather close to home for me, were fishing. And what do? They wangle some nominal certificate. This will end up in tears. I don't know if I'm getting towards. I'm just saying to you, yes. But for heaven's sake, let's not have 55 committees, which will create 55 other committees globally to address a problem which actually we really know the answers to. Streamline our action rather than end up spending more time coordinating ourselves as opposed to coordinating an action. That, to put it very frankly, I think sometimes we're part of the problem in the international community, and we confuse and don't help some of the countries. Now, on the question regarding the governance and the like, I couldn't agree with you more, Anne. I would love it if the United States would resume and rediscover its appetite for governance, because there are very few better examples than the United States. So, and I don't say that to flatter, it's just a simple fact. Now, in the meantime, I'm in absolutely no doubt that, let me put it to you this way. I believe we're sitting on one of the biggest strategic opportunities in generations dealing with Africa. I'm talking now as we, the West, given we represent certain things that other parts of the world don't represent. We are now poised to either engage with this generation that I'm telling you is about to break into politics, the majority. And for them, their aspirations are different, everything we expect of ourselves. They want their freedoms, they'd like their prosperity, they'd like to grow up and be able to marry in time, have children, have, just all the things of life. They are our potential allies. Now, do we find a way of engaging with this generation that's emerging, which, by the way, is sufficiently politically educated to demand accountability? Because that's what happened in Ethiopia. That's what happened in Sudan. Let's be clear, all right? Why not move with these populations? And so it brings us circle back to, yes, it takes money. It takes a certain type of engagement, but I think the opportunity is there. And we call it governance, whatever you will, but all these governments know right now that there is this generation that's coming up that has got them under the microscope. Now, I'd ask, if I'm a US policymaker, in my case, I'm a European policymaker, I know which side of history I want to be on, and that is the next generation. Are we doing enough of that? Are we alive to that? are we aware of the implications of not doing it? I hope that helps answer in a rather broad sweep of the brush what you're getting at. That is the strategic opportunity that awaits us, and that means using the IFIs. We need to talk. I've talked to governments in the Gulf, and when I put it that way, I've noticed I immediately get a positive reaction, as in, oh my goodness, no one's done them. You're doing the mathematics in a different way. We get it. Well, let's build on that. I hope that helps answer a little bit.
Yeah, Anna, I'll turn it back to you before I jump back in. Go ahead.
Sir, thank you very much. And I completely agree. I think that we often overlook Africa as an opportunity for the West. They are, from a U.S. perspective, they are very pro-U.S. They have a generation that is innovative, that has potential beyond compare when we look at other regions of the world. And I do agree. I think that it is, in history, in hindsight, we're going to either make it or we're going to have lost an opportunity that will forever haunt us, both from a European and also from a U.S. perspective. So thank you very much for those comments. I appreciate them.
Thank you, Ann. Well, sir, let me follow up with you know the way Washington works. You know how American policymaking works. It's similar to the way the European Union works. And the attention right now, you need I always refer to them as gravity wells. There are certain policy ideas that kind of suck up the air and the oxygen and almost serve as black holes, pulling everything into them. And the one right now that exists in Washington is the China question. And unless something is directly related to China and the global competition that the United States has with it, then it's not a primary objective of U.S. foreign policy. So how would you address, say, address it to me? Say I'm one of these individuals. Unless we're talking about China, sir, I don't care about the Horn of Africa. What do you say to me bluntly to kind of shake my head correctly so that I understand what we're talking about here?
The first question is, what do you do to make sure that these countries have an alternative to China? Because aren't an alternative. I would say that for all of us. So I'm not just saying for the US. Even in Europe, I hear that we've got, and it's not just money. Let's be clear. It's the conditions and terms on which we have a relationship, which involves diplomacy, security, and cash, loans, investments, and the like. But I've been a little concerned when I hear a rather easy, almost a cavalier approach to saying China is the problem without turning around and saying, but we have a solution, or rather we're offering an alternative. Okay? Now, in practical terms, I'd be, the sort of thoughts I would have here are the following. The debate on debt has to be addressed, and addressed very smartly, because it is a source of grave concern to me that countries have assumed debts to China under terms and by methods that we know nothing about. And in effect, what we're doing by asking to find ways to help them out of it, we're subsidizing the continued debt to China. That discussion has not been engaged fully. That is a discussion we need to be having with the countries in Africa. Do you want debt on those terms or on other terms? I was fascinated. Let me answer you by way of an anecdote. A head of state who was saying to me, you know, we've realized that, yes, it seems like easy money to China, and it seems to be quick, but the hold is eternal. You Europeans are boring, you're slow, but you know what? We know you're straight. I think I've answered you partly. Okay. Secondly, I think the US itself has lately developed some very interesting instruments for loan guarantees. It's the old OPIC, or I forget exactly. You've reshaped some of those entities in DC. It's not it's OPIC, I think. You know, put these things to work with your trade agreements and the like. Countries are eager to find telecommunications and communications platforms. If our companies don't come in and are not encouraged to come in, they will be taken, these platforms will be created and handed over to, let's say, China. Now, my answer is very simple. If that's going to occur, then there is no discrete conversation you can have anymore with the government. That's a simple matter of security. But I flip it on the other way. It is a way in which China, it's very interesting, is now entering into the issues of security, because communications in today's world is security. I don't need to tell you that. And we're seeing it begin to occur in Africa. And so I'd be tracking every single tender for the privatization that a government has for telecoms. And I would be jointly, I would love it with the EU and US. Even if our companies compete, I don't care. We have a fundamental interest. Because if we lose that game, you lose a lot else. Because communications is the way societies are going to be controlled. That's the risk of not doing things smartly and very strategically. Finally, I think there's a conversation to be had with many Africans, which is that as they emerge from the COVID crisis, which may have affected their health, but it's shattered the foundations of many economies. Don't think that these things are not being discussed. Questions are being asked. How did we get here? Why are we so vulnerable? We need to join that conversation, but listen carefully in order to help shape our own approach. You know, to simply say that China is the bad guy, fine, but you know, it's kind of so what? What's our strategy then? And my strategy is not to be anti-China. I'm as a European, I am geographically joined at the hip with Africa. So I have every interest. And I would argue for the United States, there's every interest as well. It may be slightly different in areas, but it's there. So that would be the way I would be approaching these things. But there's ample room to develop ideas. But let's make sure we're talking to the people who are going to be the ones deciding over the next 2 or 3 decades. Over.
Thank you, sir. That's well said. Honestly, my 2 cents, and I'll turn it to General Wolf to see if he has any questions or statements. But the center of gravity in conversations about China and the United States right now, the biggest advocate for a beyond purely security focused mindset when it comes to China is out of the Department of Defense, because I think probably the DoD has the full spectrum of the challenge. But also the Indo-Pacific concept, you know, the Indo part to me is where the real competition will take place over the long run. The Pacific is already an engaged chess match, where the Indo part of it, you know, the entirety of the Indian Ocean region, Africa, you know, Eurasia, Australia, all of that kind of area, that is where the economic energies and the technical requirements of transitions, of legal regimes and so forth have not yet been formulated. So having a conversation about illicit trade in the Red Sea or in the Gulf of Aden, or talking about technical requirements for telecommunications transitions, or how to best compete in overseas markets, is a direct issue relating to China. That's my 2 cents. I don't know if necessarily I have a huge amount of people echoing that sentiment. But this is why we're talking about the Indian Ocean region, that these things are all interconnected. And it all gets back to the fundamental points that Ann and yourself brought up: the issues of governance, the issues of transitions, the issue of youth, and then how these have a cascading effect over everything. So that's my 2 cents. General Wolf, do you have any questions or statements to integrate into the conversation, sir?
I appreciate Ambassador Rondos' perspective. You know, when we have met previously and we've had discussions about the region, you know, we hear a unique perspective by our colleagues who look at the security challenges, you know, that start on land but emerge in the maritime domain. And I'd be interested, Ambassador, if you have any thoughts about, you know, where there's opportunity to organize to deal with some of the maritime security challenges that we've kind of been talking about. You know, you're a man of big ideas, but how do we perhaps start in a way where we could assist these nations but respond to some of their concerns and challenges? If you take that on, please.
Actually, I think I'm glad you're asking me to focus in, because I think there are 2 or 3 opportunities that are beckoning right now. First, Saudi Arabia in the weeks to come, I think, is going to start re-emerging sort of from the COVID quarantining, diplomatic quarantining, and it's going to start pushing this idea of the Red Sea Council, which, by the way, also includes the Gulf of Aden in their mind. They've been very clear to me about how they have repeatedly said to me, we must now start looking at the combination of, as they put it, it's sort of hard security offshore, the proper policing, environmental security, the blue economy thinking. You know, how do we maximize economic incentives and provide the security for that? That is, it's very interesting to me that I'm hearing this expressed by them. I would be reaching out to organizations which are both semi-academic but also close to the government in Saudi Arabia, and I'm happy to share, you know, some contacts that I have. I think the same with the Emiratis, the same with the Omanis. We need to have that conversation there, which can then be also turned over onto the African side. But I see a lot of appetite on both sides of the water, Arabian Peninsula and the African side, to actually engage on these issues. And part of it is actually to sit down with them and say, okay, what is it you've got in mind, and what is it we can bring to the table? And I would not tarry in engaging in that conversation. And it's not just a conversation. Actually, let's get down to some planning. We in the EU have resources. We've allocated fairly significant funding for the overall maritime sector, from governance to security and the like. You know, what we don't bring is big, heavy military hardware into it. But, you know, we can help frame things in other ways. So there's ample room to begin to move from a good idea to putting down a menu of proposals that can be looked at. And so I would really encourage that. I think I have been watching for almost 10 years now the entire Somali coastline, the Kenyan coastline. There is no proper coast guard. There is no proper policing. To be honest, we've tried to do some training in Somalia, but it's just never really, whatever it is, we haven't struck the right note. I'm talking as EU. And I think a concentrated effort that would demonstrate that this is a policy priority, coming with some financial support, but secondly, where we can help be catalytic in bringing key players to. And here I want to be very frank with you. If the United States is uniquely positioned to bring people around the table from the Gulf and the East African coastline. You are uniquely positioned on issues like maritime security, maritime governance, all the issues we've been discussing, but move to bring them together. The lack of familiarity among these players is enormous. So you need to get together, get the professionals, whether it's the sailors, whether it's coast guards, whether it's lawyers. I don't care who. We can all work that out, but build up a network where these people begin to feel that they're legitimized and have got practical ideas they can go to their governments with, because we can reinforce it. Because the ideas that we're discussing here are fascinating, they're critical. But believe me, the capitals that I deal with don't wake up in the morning thinking about that. So one's got to get through to it. But I want to repeat one point. The United States is uniquely positioned. People will respond to your call in a way that others, that they wouldn't to others. And I include ourselves in the European Union. You are seen as a guarantor of security. What you're doing is redefining aspects of security. And I think put some flesh on that bone. We've exchanged ideas. There are more ideas we can all put on the table that can begin to create this web of activities. And before that thing, it just gathers its own steam. I don't know, General, if I've really helped you with that, but that's the way I would approach it.
It's incredibly helpful, and it's something that we can take back and suggest to others more than we have, and then as a way to really start small, but to address some really big needs. So thank you for your thoughts and ideas, Jeff. Back.
And I have colleagues who would be happy from my end who deal with this, who just sort of throw some ideas around and share with you some thoughts, even some actual practical projects we do, so you can judge for yourselves.
Yeah, and sir, if I can echo General Wolf, feel free to connect those individuals with me, because I'm trying to put all of these people working these issues together. I'm connected to Cromerio too, various other EU-related projects, Safe Seas, Safer Seas. All of these things are interconnected. It's the issue that no one is convening them, and your point is well taken, and it's something that NESA tries to, lead by example, but honestly too, it's something that we need to bang the drum on louder to our to those that we work with regularly, whether it be in the joint staff or with combatant command, to say, listen, we need to make this a louder a call for the region, and also it's helpful for us to understand this priority, because I think before we wrap up, I think there's also a recognition, just speaking purely from the maritime domain, that the Red Sea, and this is my own personal opinion, my own personal bias, but the Red Sea has been taken it's been taken for granted by the United States for far too long. And then, in fact, when it comes to the pure interest in the United States, the security and the health of the Red Sea region is far more essential to both Europe and to the United States than it is the security of the Gulf itself. Asian economies are reliant on the Gulf, not the United States and Europe, other than the stability of pricing. Hormuz needs to remain open, but beyond that, the essential maritime challenges are in the Red Sea. That's something that we'll continue to echo. I think echo your sentiments on here in Washington. I think we're all speaking the same language. We just need to build our audience. So, but sir, any final comments you have before we wrap up? I'll turn it back to you.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I hope this has been helpful. Your questions have helped me concentrate my mind too, and so I'm going to be following up and talking to some of my colleagues to tell them to sort of kick them into gear on one or two of these issues, and I'd very much welcome if we can sort of retain the contact. I have to confess to you, I am worried that I see it on my side of the Atlantic, but attention spans are a little short. Understanding of history is limited. And we're climbing into something very new, which is that the historical, and I'm going back 2-3 millennia of links between the Gulf and the Horn are being revived. It shouldn't scare anyone, but one shouldn't be absent. In fact, we can bring that extra something to all of this. And I think we need to sort of help a lot of our people who are making decisions, a lot of my colleagues I have to deal with, get them to lift their head above the parapet and just look a little beyond the horizon. These countries and this whole area, Eastern Mediterranean, Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, Western Indian Ocean, I keep looking at that. It's a chain that could easily be broken. And there are many people who have an interest in breaking it. And they can do it in various ways. And that's what concerns me. And it's how the maritime can corrupt the terrestrial, as it were, and vice versa. And so there's room for, and hear what General Wolf was saying, I want to really echo. It's nice to do big thinking, but the only way we're going to succeed is by showing some successes. Let's just get cracking, because success will breed more success, will breed confidence. Let's identify those programs, projects, activities where people just say, we get it, and they have an interest in making it work. That's going to be the key, and we've arrived at that point. Otherwise, it's just talk. So I thank you very much for letting me talk, but let's see if there's some real practical ideas that could come up. There's ample room for it, and I know you all have all sorts of experience and ideas, and we'd be happy to join you, work with you, but also just keep exchanging ideas. So I'm very grateful to you for this opportunity to talk with you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And given your kind sentiments, NESA, you give us an opening. You open the door just a little bit, and we're going to leap through. So don't be surprised if your offer of assisting us is exploited in a myriad of ways.
No.
I know we have lots of, I have pots cooking. I know Ann has pots cooking. So NESA's trying to get to these issues, and so
right.
And we're glad to have a partner with you. And so I will follow up with you
Please do.
in your office about various things that we can work on.
Yeah, very happy to do that. This is a much more strategic issue, and I wanted, anything that we can do from a transatlantic perspective to get focused on this, I think would be of immense value. So consider it. It is indeed an open door. So would welcome it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, sir. Enjoy the remainder of your afternoon. We'll be in touch soon through electronic communications. Stay safe there in Kenya. And we'll talk to you soon, sir. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. And bye-bye to you all.